Shadows Across the World. Chapter 1. The Incident in Sydney. Ethan Cole leaned against the railing of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, his eyes scanning the horizon. The sun was setting over the Sydney Opera House, casting a golden glow across the water. To the casual observer, Ethan looked like any other tourist, enjoying the iconic view, but Ethan was no tourist. He was an operative for a clandestine branch of the Australian Secret Intelligence Service, ASIs, known as the Shadows. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down at the screen. A single message appeared. "The ghost has awoken. Make contact." Ethan's heart rate quickened. He had been waiting for this moment for weeks. The ghost referred to an elusive figure named Viktor Volkov, a former Russian spy turned rogue. Volkov was rumored to have sensitive information that could destabilize multiple governments, including Australia's allies in Europe. Ethan pushed off the railing and began walking towards Circular Quay. He had arranged to meet his contact at a small cafe near the water. As he navigated through the throngs of people, his mind raced with possibilities. Volkov's appearance in Sydney was unexpected. What was the Russian doing on Australian soil? And more importantly, what did he know? Ethan reached the cafe and spotted his contact, a woman in her late 30s with auburn hair tied back in a ponytail. She was seated at an outdoor table, sipping a cappuccino and reading a newspaper. Ethan sat down across from her without a word. The woman didn't look up from her paper. "Volkov's been spotted," she said in a low voice. "He's staying at the Fairmont Hotel under an alias. We've managed to tap into his communications, but it's encrypted. He's meeting someone tonight at a warehouse in Baru. We need you to intercept him and find out what he's up to." Ethan nodded. "What's my cover?" "You're a businessman from Melbourne, interested in buying real estate. Use the name Michael Hargrove. Volkov's contact is posing as a property developer. Make the exchange and find out what Volkov knows." Ethan stood up, leaving a few bills on the table. "I'll be in touch." As he walked away, Ethan's thoughts were already shifting to the mission ahead. He had been trained for situations like this, but dealing with a rogue agent of Volkov's caliber was always dangerous. He needed to be on his guard. One wrong move, and it could be his last. Chapter 2. The Meeting. The warehouse was located on the outskirts of Barangaroo, a part of Sydney known for its commercial developments. Ethan arrived just after midnight. The streets were deserted, the only sound, the occasional cry of a seagull. He approached the building with caution, his hand resting on the concealed holster at his side. The door to the warehouse was slightly ajar. Ethan slipped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He could make out the shapes of large shipping containers stacked against the walls. The air was thick with the smell of oil and salt water. A figure stepped out from the shadows. "Mr. Hargrove, I presume." Ethan turned to face the man. He was tall, with sharp features and a Russian accent. His hair was graying at the temples, and there was a scar running down his left cheek. It was Viktor Volkov. "You must be Volkov," Ethan said, keeping his voice steady. "I hear you have some property for sale." Volkov smiled thinly. "Let's not waste time with pleasantries. Mr. I know you're not here to discuss real estate. You want information, and I have it, but it comes at a price." Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I have the money," he said. "Now tell me what you know." Volkov took the envelope and opened it, counting the bills inside. Satisfied, he slipped it into his jacket. "Very well," he said. "I've uncovered a plot by a faction within the Russian government to destabilize several European countries. They plan to use cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns to create chaos and weaken alliances. Their ultimate goal is to reassert Russian dominance over Eastern Europe." Ethan's mind raced. If what Volkov said was true, it could have far-reaching implications for global security. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "What's in it for you?" Volkov's eyes hardened. "I was betrayed by my own people. I have no loyalty to them anymore. I want revenge, and the best way to get it is by exposing their plans. But I can't do it alone. I need someone on the inside who can help me take them down." Ethan considered his options. Volkov could be lying, but if he was telling the truth, this could be the break they needed. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Access," Volkov replied. "I need access to ASIS's intelligence network. With your help, we can gather the evidence needed to bring down those responsible." Before Ethan could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. He turned to see a group of men entering the building, guns drawn. "It's a trap," Ethan shouted, drawing his own weapon. Shots rang out, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Ethan dove behind a shipping container, firing back at their attackers. Volkov ducked behind another container, returning fire. The warehouse was filled with the sounds of gunfire and shouting. Ethan managed to take down two of the gunmen, but more were pouring in. "We need to get out of here," he yelled to Volkov nodded, and together they made their way towards a side exit. As they reached the door, Volkov was hit in the shoulder by a stray bullet. He stumbled, and Ethan grabbed him, pulling him through the door. They ran into the night, disappearing into the maze of streets. Ethan's mind was racing. Someone had set him up. The question was who? Chapter 3. A Race Against Time. Back in his apartment in Sydney, Ethan helped Volkov tend to his wound. The bullet had passed through cleanly, but he was losing blood. "We need to get you to a doctor," Ethan said. "No hospitals," Volkov replied through gritted teeth. "It's too risky. Just bandage me up, and I'll be fine." As Ethan worked, Volkov filled him in on the details of the plot. The faction within the Russian government was using a network of operatives across Europe to carry out their plan. They had already infiltrated key government agencies and media outlets, spreading misinformation and creating discord. Their goal was to weaken NATO and the European Union, making it easier for Russia to reassert control over its former territories. Ethan knew they needed to act fast. If the plot was already underway, there wasn't much time to stop it. "We need to get to Europe," he said. "We can't fight this from here. We need to get on the ground, gather evidence, and alert the authorities." Volkov nodded. "There's a safe house in Paris. We can start there. I have contacts who can help us." Ethan made a few calls, securing false identities and travel arrangements. By dawn, they were on a flight to Paris, leaving Australia behind. Chapter 4. Shadows in Paris. The safe house in Paris was a small apartment in the Montmartre district. Ethan and Volkov lay low, avoiding the attention of the local authorities. Volkov's contacts had provided them with information on the Russian operatives in the city. Their first target was a man named Ivan Petrov, a known associate of the Rogue faction. Ethan followed Petrov for days, watching as he met with various individuals in cafes and government buildings. One evening, he saw Petrov enter a bar in the Latin Quarter. Ethan slipped in behind him, taking a seat at the bar. He watched as Petrov met with a well-dressed man, their conversation hushed. Ethan activated a small recording device hidden in his jacket, trying to catch snippets of their conversation. He heard mentions of Phase 2 and Berlin, but nothing concrete. He needed more. As Petrov and the man stood to leave, Ethan followed them out into the street. He watched as they parted ways, Petrov heading towards the Saint. Ethan moved quickly, catching up to Petrov and grabbing him from behind, dragging him into a nearby alley. "Who are you meeting with?" Ethan demanded, pressing a gun to Petrov's back. Petrov struggled, but Ethan held him tight. "I don't know what you're talking about," Petrov spat. "Don't lie to me," Ethan said, tightening his grip. "I know you're working with the Rogue faction. Tell me about Phase 2. What's happening in Berlin?" Petrov hesitated, fear in his eyes. "They're planning a major cyber attack on the German government," he said finally. "It's meant to disrupt communications and cause chaos. They have operatives in place already. It's happening in 2 days." Ethan knocked Petrov out with a blow to the head and quickly left the alley. He needed to get this information to Volkov. Time was running out. Chapter 5. The Berlin Operation. Ethan and Volkov arrived in Berlin with little time to spare. They set up in a small hotel room, coordinating with their contacts to track down the operatives involved in the planned They discovered that the attack was being coordinated from an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city. Ethan, Volkov, and a small team of local intelligence agents stormed the factory the night before the attack. Inside, they found a group of hackers working on computers, lines of code streaming across their screens. The operatives were taken by surprise, and after a brief struggle, they were apprehended. Volkov accessed the main computer, downloading the data needed to expose the plot. As he worked, he noticed a countdown timer on the screen. "We need to shut this down," he said urgently. "The attack is already in motion." Ethan and Volkov worked together, disabling the systems and preventing the attack from going live. As they finished, they heard sirens approaching. The authorities had arrived, alerted by one of their contacts. Volkov handed Ethan a flash drive. "This has all the information we need," he said. "Take it to your superiors. It will expose the Rogue faction and their plans. I'll stay behind and deal with the authorities. They'll believe me if I say I'm an informant." Ethan hesitated. "What about you?" Volkov smiled. "I'll be fine. Go. The world needs to know what's happening." Ethan nodded, turning and running towards the exit. As he disappeared into the night, he heard Volkov's voice behind him. "Good luck, my friend." Chapter 6. The Aftermath. Back in Australia, Ethan debriefed his superiors, handing over the flash drive. The information on it led to the dismantling of the rogue faction and the arrest of several high-ranking officials. The cyber attack on Germany was prevented, and the alliance between Europe and Australia was strengthened. Ethan received word that Volkov had been taken into protective custody by German intelligence. His information had been crucial in stopping the plot, and he was being offered asylum in exchange for his cooperation. Ethan stood on the Sydney Harbour Bridge once more, looking out over the water. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city. He thought of Volkov and the danger they had faced together. The world was a safer place, but Ethan knew that the shadows were always lurking. There would always be new threats, new challenges. But as long as there were people willing to stand against them, there was hope. Ethan turned away from the view, his phone buzzing in his pocket. A new message. A new mission. He slipped the phone into his pocket and walked into the night, ready for whatever lay ahead.